Kent J has an interesting question. It is too small to show up on screen. I'll read it out. Most people agree that for cinematic video, shutter speed should be double your frame rate, ISO as low as possible, and then use an ND filter to properly expose. That is a common advice. What if you're doing a fly-through of an indoor venue that starts outside and then flies into the venue? What's the best way to adjust for the outdoor to indoor transition? Auto ISO, auto shutter, etc. I will say if any like cinema pros weigh in and say this is how we do it, you should listen to them. I am not a cinema pro. I don't do a lot of this type of flying professionally. So I will defer to anybody who actually does this for a living. But I would say there's a couple ways to approach this that I've seen people use. One of them is to cut the shot. So you hide the transition. Like as you fly through the window, you do a little cut of some kind, maybe a crossfade, maybe, I don't know. You figure out a way to hide the cut. And you do two shots, one with correct exposure for the outside and one with correct exposure for the inside. And you manage that transition manually in the editor. I think that most people would agree that you should not use auto exposure because the camera adjusting exposure is going to ruin the interior shot. I think most people are probably going to, like pros are going to say that. Captain Kazi says tent the outside if you can afford it. I assume Captain Kazi means have a great big tent outside that if you're going to open with like a wide shot of the whole building and then turn and fly in through a door or window, you're not going to tent that. Captain Kazi says if you have no choice, then go with auto aperture, obviously not auto shutter. And Captain Kazi says auto ISO, I guess, is going to give you too much noise. The problem is that if you're using like a GoPro, the aperture is fixed, at which point ISO would be the only one you could use.
Did you see that pinned comment I made there?
Oh, very nice. Good point. Thank you, Plenty. Flying Grip points out that GoPro Labs firmware has some settings that change the speed at which the GoPro reacts to scene changes, which causes it to change slower or faster, which can make it like less... I think you would make it slower so it's less obvious that it's hunting. Siati says, when I've had that situation, I've flown it 3 times. Once with the proper outdoor exposure, once with auto, and once with the proper indoor exposure. And then the editor deals with it. Very nice. Captain Kazi is a commercial director in Hollywood, so definitely have some trust in their opinion. Yeah, Captain Kazi is probably talking about a more like a DSLR, a Komodo, or some other cinema level camera where you have adjustable ISO, aperture, and shutter, at which point changing the aperture is going to change your depth of field, but probably is going to be acceptable, better than changing the ISO and getting a lot of image noise. The other thing to point out, which no hobbyist is going to be doing this, but really professional cameras have the aperture, the ISO, all of those settings are controlled in real time by a separate camera operator. So the drone operator would be flying the drone and the camera operator would be adjusting the exposure in real time. And that's how like a real pro would do it. So hopefully there are some thoughts and hopefully they're helpful.